She was working in a bridal shop in Flushing, Queens, till her boyfriend kicked her out in one of those crushing scenes. If you know those words by heart, and you do, then you already know that The Nanny was never just a sitcom. It was a personality transplant for CBS, a fashion revolution in leopard print, and somehow, improbably, one of the most personal shows ever put on American television. Fran Drescher played Fran Fine, a Jewish girl from Queens who stumbles into the Sheffield mansion and never quite leaves. Charles Shaughnessy played Maxwell Sheffield, the buttoned-up British Broadway producer who doesn't know what hit him. Daniel Davis played Niles, the butler with the sharpest tongue on 1990s television. And for 6 seasons, from 1993 to 1999, the whole glorious nasal leopard print operation ran on CBS and regularly pulled in audiences of 20 million viewers a week at its peak. What most people don't know is how strange the road to that Sheffield mansion actually was. The voice CBS tried to kill. The president of a network cornered on a transatlantic flight. The show that was pre-sold as something entirely different before Fran Drescher refused to let it be. And the real-life story behind the show that makes everything you laughed at feel a little different. Today we're counting down 15 wild facts you didn't know about The Nanny. Hit that like button and subscribe before we dive in. It genuinely helps the channel. Now, let's get into it. Number 15, the show almost had a completely different name, and a completely different nanny. Before Fran Fine existed, before the bridal shop in Flushing, before a single frame of The Nanny was ever shot, CBS pre-sold the show to its biggest advertiser with one crucial detail in place. The Nanny was Italian. Here's how it happened. Fran Drescher and her then-husband Peter Mark Jacobson had just sold the concept to CBS. A Queens girl stumbles into a wealthy British family's home. Chaos and chemistry ensue. The network loved it. So much so that before Drescher and Jacobson had even written the pilot script, CBS turned around and pre-sold the show to Procter & Gamble, one of the largest advertising buyers in television. And to make the sale, they pitched The Nanny as Italian-American. Broader appeal, they figured, safer, more universal. When Drescher found out, she said no, not politely. She knew the show was drawing directly on her own family, her own upbringing, her own Queens logic. Writing the character as Italian would gut everything specific about it. She told CBS The Nanny had to be Jewish, or it wasn't the show. CBS let her have it. And when Fran Fine debuted on November 3, 1993, she became, in Drescher's own words, the first Jewish actress to play a Jewish character in a starring role in prime time since Molly Goldberg in 1948. Nearly half a century. One barrier, cleared because Drescher refused to let a pre-sale to a soap company tell her who her character was. The advertisers got their show. They just didn't get to choose which culture it came from. Number 14, the whole show was pitched with no pitch, on a 9-hour transatlantic flight. Drescher's career in the early 1990s was not going the way she'd planned. She'd had a short-lived sitcom called Princesses on CBS in 1991, which was canceled after 5 episodes. She was in a rut, so she scraped together her frequent flyer, miles from the now-defunct TWA, found she had just enough for a first-class transatlantic seat, and booked herself to Europe. On the plane, she looked over and recognized the man sitting next to her, Jeff Sagansky, president of CBS Entertainment. She went to the bathroom, put on her makeup, gave herself a pep talk, and came back out swinging. For 9 hours, because where was he going to go? Drescher talked Sagansky into agreeing to a pitch meeting when they both got back to Los Angeles. There was just one problem. She had no pitch. Nothing. She'd talked her way into a meeting for a show that didn't exist yet. She landed in London to visit her friend Twiggy and found that Twiggy was working and largely unavailable. So Drescher spent the afternoon schlepping Twiggy's 12-year-old daughter around London as company. When the girl complained her new shoes were hurting her feet, Drescher's advice was to step on the backs of them and break them in, not because it was good for the child, but because she didn't want to cut her afternoon short. She later described that moment as the entire show in miniature, an adult giving a child advice that served the adult's interests entirely. She called Jacobson from London. Sound of Music, but instead of Julie Andrews, I Come to the Door. He said that's it. They went back to Los Angeles, pitched it formally, and CBS greenlit it. The whole engine of a 6-season hit came from a 9-hour hostage situation at 35,000 feet, and a 12-year-old's uncomfortable shoes. Number 13, CBS tried to kill The Voice. The Voice had other plans. Before The Nanny, before she was a household name, Fran Drescher was repeatedly told the same thing by the same industry. The Voice had to go. It was too nasal, too Queens, too specific. A voice like that wasn't going to get her a career. It was going to end one before it started. She listened, she hired a professional diction coach and worked at it seriously. By her own account, she was successful. She learned to speak without the accent, without the nasal quality, without any of the vocal markers that made her sound like herself. And then she couldn't get a single job. The moment she spoke normally, the work disappeared. Casting directors had been calling her in precisely because of the voice. Strip it away, and she was just another actress. Put it back, and suddenly she was the only person in the room who sounded like that. Her manager eventually said what the evidence was already showing. The voice wasn't the problem. It was the product. Here's the kicker. When she was starting out, she also lied to get an agent. She'd been runner-up for Miss New York Teenager in 1973, but when she was cold-calling talent agencies, she told them she'd won. It got her in the door. Once inside, The Voice closed the deal. She went on to play a small role in Saturday Night Fever in 1977, a scene-stealing publicist in This Is Spinal Tap in 1984, and eventually created and starred in a show built entirely around the voice she was told to fix. Number 12. The Nanny's butler was from Arkansas, and he fooled everyone. Daniel Davis, born November 26, 1945, in Gurdon, Arkansas, studied at the Arkansas Arts Center, spent years in regional theater, and for the entire run of The Nanny, he played the most convincingly British butler in sitcom history. Niles, sharp-tongued, deadpan, impeccably turned out, was so convincing that fans wrote letters to the show, not to compliment Davis, to suggest that Charles Shaughnessy, the actual British actor playing Maxwell Sheffield, should take accent lessons from his co-star. Shaughnessy was born in London, educated at Eton, read law at Cambridge. His accent was not fake, the letters were. Here's the thing about how Davis got the role. He showed up to the network callback and found himself waiting in the same room as Roddy McDowall, the London-born veteran actor with 50 years of film credits and a face everyone in Hollywood recognized. Davis figured he had no chance. 3 hours later, Fran Drescher called him personally. He had the part. Her reason, delivered without ceremony. If they'd cast McDowall, it would have been the Roddy McDowall show. And this, she informed him, was the Fran Drescher show. Davis later said that from that moment, he knew exactly where he stood and exactly where he'd be for the next 6 years. His British accent, built from decades of classical theater training rather than a passport, was so good that to this day, viewers meeting him for the first time are genuinely surprised. An Arkansas boy from the American South played the archetypal English butler, and the actual Englishman on the same show got the complaints. Television is a strange business. Number 11. Maxwell Sheffield was a real lord. His British accent was real. Fans thought it was fake. Charles Shaughnessy didn't just play a British aristocrat. He is one. Born February 9th, 1955, in London, he is the 5th Baron Shaughnessy, a hereditary title in the British peerage, inherited in 2007 when his second cousin died without an heir. He attended Eton College. He read law at Magdalen College, Cambridge, where he joined the Footlights Dramatic Society. When he showed up to play Maxwell Sheffield, a fictional British Broadway producer who behaved like royalty, he was bringing the real background with him. He just wasn't technically a baron yet. That part came after the show ended. His path to The Nanny ran through 8 years on the American soap opera Days of Our Lives, where he played secret agent Shane Donovan from 1984 to 1992. When he left daytime television for primetime, he arrived at The Nanny pilot with the accent he'd been born with. Viewers didn't believe it. Letters arrived at the studio, not just 1 or 2, enough to be noteworthy, suggesting that Shaughnessy's British accent sounded put on and artificial, and that he should seek guidance from Daniel Davis, his co-star, on how to do it better. The irony is absolute. Davis, the Arkansas-born American, was so convincing in his performed British accent that he undermined the credibility of the man next to him, who actually grew up in England. Shaughnessy took it in stride. The show's writers eventually made the whole situation into a joke. In the final season, Niles performs in one of Grace's school plays and receives bad reviews, specifically criticizing his English accent for sounding fake. The Nanny managed to make reality look like a performance and then wrote an episode about it. Number 10. The pilot used a completely different theme song. The theme song that runs through every episode of The Nanny, the one you can sing word for word right now whether you want to or not, was not the original. The pilot episode aired with an entirely different song. For the very first episode of The Nanny, Drescher and Jacobson chose a Broadway number that felt right for their Broadway-adjacent show. If My Friends Could See Me Now, from Sweet Charity, the 1966 Broadway musical written by Cy Coleman and Dorothy Fields. The original performance by Gwen Verdon was the version they used. It fit the themes, a woman suddenly living a life beyond what anyone expected of her. But it wasn't specific, and it wasn't catchy in the way The Nanny needed its theme to be. After the pilot, a new song was needed. Jazz singer and songwriter Ann Hampton Calloway, who had crossed paths with Drescher years earlier, got the call. Calloway had written theme songs for pilots that went nowhere before. This one she knew was different. She wrote The Nanny Named Fran, the show's entire premise and character set to music in under 90 seconds. Every episode opened with it for the full run. It became one of the most recognizable theme songs in 1990s television. The song tells you the whole show: who Fran Fine is, where she came from, why she's there, and why the father saw more. It's less a theme song than a pilot episode compressed into 90 seconds. The original Sweet Charity pilot version still exists, but nobody remembers it. That's the point. Number 9. The high school sweethearts who created the show were quietly falling apart while making it. Fran Drescher and Peter Mark Jacobson met when they were 15 years old. They married in 1978. They co-created The Nanny together, wrote it together, produced it together, and spent 6 seasons building one of the most successful will they won't they romance formats in television history. A show about two people who clearly belong together and can't admit it, while their own marriage was ending. They separated in 1996, 3 years before the show finished. Their divorce was finalized in 1999, the same year the final episode aired, and the truth about why only emerged years later. Jacobson is gay. He didn't know it, or couldn't fully reckon with it, during most of their marriage. He'd seen 3 different therapists through the years together, all of whom told him the same thing: you're straight. You may have these thoughts, other men do too. It wasn't until he entered therapy following a traumatic event in 1985 that he began, slowly, to understand his own sexuality. He came out publicly in 2000, a year after the divorce. Drescher's reaction, which she's described in interviews, was a mixture of sadness, understanding, and genuine affection. She called him her soulmate. He remains, by her account, one of her closest friends. They went on to create another show together, Happily Divorced, in 2011. Directly based on their real story. And, somewhere inside the 6 seasons of Fran Fine, waiting for Maxwell Sheffield to admit what was obvious to everyone, is the story of 2 people who built a show about longing without ever quite talking about their own. Number 8. The most dangerous moment in Fran Drescher's life happened 8 years before the show. January 1985. Fran Drescher and Peter Mark Jacobson were at home in their Los Angeles apartment, having dinner with a friend. 2 armed men broke down the door. They tied up Jacobson. They assaulted Drescher and her friend at gunpoint. Both men were later caught. One received a life sentence. Drescher didn't speak publicly about the attack for over a decade. In 1996, during the height of The Nanny's success, a tabloid publication ran the story. She had to relive it under the worst possible circumstances. Not on her terms, not when she was ready, but at the moment of her greatest public exposure. She described the aftermath to Fox News years later as feeling like being shattered in a million pieces. She was on edge for a long time. A dropped tray of utensils in a restaurant once made her jump out of her seat and scream. It took roughly a year before she felt close to herself again. The ripple effects ran further than anyone knew at the time. The attack was what sent Jacobson into therapy, and therapy was where his understanding of his own sexuality began to shift. A crime committed 8 years before the show quietly shaped the people who made it. Number 7. While filming the final season, Drescher was secretly trying to find out what was wrong with her. The show was ending, the marriage was ending, and something else was happening that nobody on set knew about. Her symptoms, staining between periods, cramping, didn't fit the standard profile. Doctors told her she was too young for uterine cancer, too thin. Uterine cancer was mostly a postmenopausal condition, or connected to obesity. Drescher was neither. One after another, 8 doctors in 2 years ran tests, came back normal, and sent her home with a diagnosis of perimenopausal symptoms and a prescription she didn't need. Her own description of the 2 years was a 2-year, 8-doctor odyssey. She kept pushing because she knew something was wrong and the test kept saying it wasn't. In 2000, the 8th doctor she consulted finally ordered a uterine biopsy. 2 minutes, an in-office test. It came back positive. Stage 1 uterine cancer, caught early enough to treat. She had a hysterectomy and has been cancer-free since 2000. She founded the Cancer Schmancer movement, dedicated to early detection of women's cancers. The show ended in 1999. Its creator spent the following year finding out she had cancer she'd been fighting to diagnose for 2 years. Nobody in the audience knew any of it while it was happening. Number 6, the show's biggest laugh was also its biggest lie. Here's the tension at the center of every episode. Will Fran Fine and Maxwell Sheffield ever get together? For most of the run, the answer was always almost. They nearly kissed. He nearly said it. She said it. He didn't hear it. The show lived in the electricity of almost for 5 seasons. And then, at the end of season 5, Maxwell finally proposed. Fran said yes. They got married. Fans had demanded it for years. Drescher and Jacobson later said the quiet part out loud. Answering the question killed the show. The will, they won't, they format only works as long as they won't. The moment Fran Fine had what she'd spent 5 seasons reaching for, the audience had what they'd spent 5 seasons waiting for. And there was nothing left to wait for. The ratings declined sharply in season 6. The audience had largely moved on by the time the twins arrived and the happy ending landed. It's a trap almost every long-running romance format falls into. Moonlighting, Friends, Castle. And Drescher and Jacobson walked into it with their eyes open. They wanted to give the audience what it asked for. What the audience asked for was the thing that ended the thing they loved. Number 5. The show aired in 90 countries. Russia made more of it than America did. The Nanny ran for 146 episodes across 6 seasons on CBS. That's the American version. In Russia, the show ran for 173 episodes across 7 seasons. The Russian version didn't just remake the show, it eventually ran out of original American scripts to adapt, and had to call in the American writing staff to produce new material specifically for the Russian market. The Russian series, My Fair Nanny, premiered in 2004 on STS and became one of the most successful shows in Russian television history. Its protagonist, Vika, was a Ukrainian immigrant navigating Moscow, rather than a Jewish girl from Queens. Same fish-out-of-water engine, different cultural fuel. It worked just as well. When the American show ended at 146 episodes, Russian producers simply weren't done. They used the time-honored method of resetting the finale. The marriage proposal was undone via a dream sequence. The unresolved tension was restored, and continued the show for another season using newly written material. Meanwhile, the Italian version made a quieter adjustment. Italian broadcasters dubbed the show, rather than remaking it, but changed Fran Fine from Jewish to a lapsed Catholic, renamed her Francesca Cacace, and removed the Jewish identity of both her mother and grandmother. The character who had made history on American primetime was quietly stripped of the identity that made the history worth making. The flashy girl from Flushing crossed 90 countries and 30 languages, and not all of them let her stay exactly who she was. Number 4, 2 cast members were pregnant at the same time in season 5. During production of The Nanny's 5th season, both Lauren Lane, who played C.C. Babcock, and Rachel Chagall, who played Fran's best friend Val, became pregnant. 2 supporting cast members simultaneously in a show where both characters appeared regularly. The production's response to this is a small masterpiece of television problem-solving. For Chagall's pregnancy, the writers made no attempt whatsoever to hide it. No strategic camera angles, no convenient props, no storylines explaining a sudden weight change. Val's pregnancy was simply there, visible on screen, ignored by the script. It was the least subtle non-acknowledgement in sitcom history. For Lauren Lane, the solution required more creativity. When her pregnancy reached the point where it could no longer be worked around, the writers sent C.C. Babcock to a psychiatric sanitarium. The character who had spent 4 seasons scheming to marry Maxwell Sheffield was simply committed, written out with a storyline that kept C.C. in the show's universe without requiring her to be physically present. The show even acknowledged its own awkwardness about the situation. In one episode, C.C. makes a reference to the character, Elaine on Seinfeld, being hidden by props during the actress's pregnancy, while simultaneously hiding behind props. A sitcom breaking the fourth wall to comment on the exact problem it was also having in real time, using the exact method it was satirizing. Whatever its flaws, The Nanny was never short of self-awareness. Number 3. Fran Drescher was in This Is Spinal Tap. Long before The Nanny, Fran Drescher had a role in the 1984 Rob Reiner mockumentary This Is Spinal Tap. She played Bobby Fleckman, the sharp-tongued publicist for a heavy metal band that cannot seem to get anything right. It's a small role, but a memorable one. Drescher at full pitch, exactly the energy she'd eventually bring to Fran Fine, just pointed at a different target. The Spinal Tap cult runs deep. Musicians who toured for decades carried the film with them. When Drescher has spoken about it in interviews, the stories she tells are consistent. People like Bruce Springsteen and Chris Martin have stopped her because of Bobby Fleckman specifically. Springsteen once admitted he'd shared an elevator with her years earlier and had been too intimidated to say anything. The woman who eventually became famous as a nanny from Queens first made her mark on the music industry's most obsessive fans as a fictional publicist. Here's the detail that sits at the intersection of coincidence and comedy. Fran Fine, the character Drescher created and played through the show's entire run, appeared in an episode alongside a character named Bobby Fleckman, her nanny character, her Spinal Tap character, in the same scene. Drescher has confirmed that The Nanny and This Is Spinal Tap share a universe, meaning Fran Fine and Bobby Fleckman are both real in the same fiction at the same time. 2 iconic characters, 1 voice, 1 actress, and a fictional universe flexible enough to contain both of them. Number 2. The woman who dressed Fran Fine called it before the show existed. Brenda Cooper was the costume designer who built Fran Fine's wardrobe, the leopard print, the Moschino, the Versace, the sequins, the fruit appliques, the complete visual identity of one of the most recognizable characters in 1990s television. She won an Emmy for it in 1995. None of that was an accident, and here's the thing, she saw it coming before anyone else did. Cooper had crossed paths with Drescher years earlier while working on the short-lived CBS sitcom Princesses, the same show that introduced Drescher to Jeff Sagansky. At some point during that job, Drescher told Cooper something along the lines of, if she ever got her own show, Cooper would be the one dressing her. Cooper didn't think much of it. Princesses was canceled after 5 episodes. About a year later, Cooper got the call. The show had sold. It was happening, and Drescher meant what she said. Cooper's approach was specific. Most of the outfits weren't couture. They were off-the-rack pieces styled aggressively, combined in ways no stylist playing it safe would attempt. Animal print against sequins. A Betsy Johnson dress under a fake fur. Fran Fine dressed herself as if the question of whether it worked had already been settled in her favor. That's a character choice. Cooper made it with fabric. The Emmy validated the whole approach. Fran Fine's wardrobe now has dedicated Instagram accounts, 30 years later. Cooper won the award. The woman who had been told in a brief conversation on a cancellation that she'd get the next call, got the next call, and made the most of it. Number 1, the show that made everyone laugh was heading for Broadway. Then, the composer died. In 2020, Fran Drescher and Peter Mark Jacobson announced that The Nanny was being developed as a Broadway musical. Rachel Bloom would write the lyrics. Adam Schlesinger, Emmy-winning songwriter, Fountains of Wayne co-founder, Bloom's creative partner on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, would compose the music. Drescher and Jacobson would write the book. A serious creative team for a serious theatrical undertaking. Then, on April 1st, 2020, Adam Schlesinger died of COVID-19. He was 52 years old. He had been on a ventilator. Fran Drescher posted about it on Instagram. Bloom, who had just given birth and was watching her newborn recover in the NICU across the country, lost one of the most important people in her professional life. The musical she and Schlesinger had been building together was left unfinished. The project has continued developing, now without the composer who was attached from the start. The one question the announcement originally raised was obvious. Would Fran Drescher play Fran Fine? Her answer was the same before and after the loss. She'd love to, but they'd have to change the title to The Granny. That line is the whole show in miniature, the self-deprecation with perfect timing. Drescher is 68. The voice is unchanged. The presence is unchanged. The wardrobe, by all available evidence, is substantially unchanged. She has mentioned wanting to play Sylvia Fine, Fran's mother, the character based on her own. The daughter is playing the mother. The woman who built Fran Fine stepped back into the Sheffield household in the role that shaped Fran Fine from the outside. And there you have it. 15 wild facts about the nanny. Which one surprised you the most? The Arkansas butler who out-Britished the actual Brit? The Italian version that quietly changed who Fran Fine was? Or the 9-hour flight where Drescher talked her way into a pitch meeting for a show she hadn't thought of yet? Let us know in the comments below. And hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Until next time.